Roberts was born John Riccobino in New York City, New York, to a Sicilian-American father and non-Italian mother. His father, Nat Riccobino, had earlier moved with his brothers from Sicily and made a living through involvement with various mob-controlled businesses throughout New York in the late 1940s.
When I was 5 or 6, instead of taking me to school, my dad took me around with him. One day in 1955, he took me to New Jersey. Whilst on the road, he pulled up and walked over to a car that was parked on a bridge. He pulled out his gun from his waistband. He said something to the guy in the car and then shot the man, boom, boom, boom. My father then opened the door of the car, pushed the man over sideways, got into the car, and then rolled the car off the bridge. He then got back into our car and asked me what just happened. I said, no, I didn't see anything.
It was this day that John felt like a man. He'd just seen his father kill another man, and it was their secret. The law eventually caught up with Robert's father, and he was deported back to Sicily. Growing up on the mean streets of New York without a father led Roberts into a life of crime. After his father left for Sicily, John's mother tried to wipe the mafia reputation off the family name. By changing John's surname to something more American, Roberts was chosen. Despite his mother's attempts to keep John away from crime, the seeds of a criminal had already been planted. After being apprehended by police for kidnapping, Roberts was given an opportunity to expunge his record with military service. He claims to have served with the 101st Airborne for 4 years in Vietnam, though no records could be found proving his military service.
The Army recruiters had been smart about me. When I got to Vietnam, they put me in with some guys as bad as me, and God Almighty, we went crazy over there. The sickest part of it was that we enjoyed it.
Upon returning from Vietnam, Roberts got back into street crimes, mostly drug rip-off and robberies, but also collecting debts for his uncle. During his time on the streets, he struck up a friendship with Junior Sirico, who later went on to play Paulie Walnuts in Sopranos. Junior was a tough guy. He was really good with a switchblade. He worked for a guy called Fat Anthony Rabito, who was in the Bonanno family. Roberts approached his Uncle Sam and floated the idea of him working in the nightclub business. Uncle Sam took it to Uncle Joe, who took it to Carlo Gambino, and they agreed that I should work in the nightclub business.
I was now a soldier in the Gambino family. Gambino gave me one of his top young guys called Andy Benfante. Andy was a real wild guy.
Andy called himself a new breed of Italian. He didn't dress like other soldiers in the family. He wore open silk shirts, expensive shoes, gold chains, and nice watches. He was into getting high and partying in clubs.
The first night I hung out with Andy, he said, let's do some coke. This freaked me out because doing drugs in the mob was a no-no. I thought he was trying to test me. He said, fuck that shit, man, let's get high.
Andy was unique. He was completely loyal to Gambino, but he didn't give a fuck about what anyone thought about him. He drove a big black Lincoln Continental with the extra chrome and the fake spare tire at the back. Not because he thought it was a good car, it's because it was a ridiculous car. Andy did a lot of shit just to make himself laugh. During his time with Andy, Roberts was scoping out restaurants and clubs to take over. Roberts would run into hippies wanting to get high. He'd introduce them to his friend Jack Bucciano, whom Roberts did drug rip-offs with in the past. Bucciano would rip them off and then split the profits with Roberts and Andy.
One time we ripped off a hippie. The hippie returned to the restaurant I met him at and told me to give him back his money. I told him, fuck you. As I left the restaurant, I noticed these hippies had turned up on motorcycles. I'd never seen the Hells Angels before, maybe in movies, but not in real life. After a few days, they turned up at the restaurant, banging on the door. I wasn't scared to fight, but fighting with 20 guys was a losing situation. So I called Andy. He told me, let them bang on the doors, I'll take care of it. Half an hour later, 2 refrigerator trucks pulled up. My whole life, my uncles bragged about their meat guys. The Union meat packers were loyal to our family. This night, I finally saw them in action. They piled out of the trucks. These guys were 300, 400 pounds and were used to throwing dead cows around. They were like an army of pro wrestlers, and they carried meat hooks and baseball bats.
The fight wasn't even close. They jumped on the Angels and gave them an ass kicking they'd never forget. For them, it was less work fucking up the Hells Angels than throwing around frozen cows. That night, Roberts finally saw the benefits of working with the family. He was untouchable. No one was going to fuck with him. Even Jesus Christ couldn't touch him. Roberts and Andy decided to buy a restaurant called Alice's. They had an arrangement with the owner to pay in installments, but after a while, Andy and Roberts decided they weren't going to pay him anymore.
Andy said, "Fuck this guy, he's nothing."
It turned out that the owner, Hampton, had a friendship with John Gotti.
We didn't know who John Gotti was at the time. There were loads of guys like him. Hampton went crying to Gotti about the situation. Gotti wanted to take a cut of what we'd normally pay to Hampton, and if he didn't get his cut, he'd take over Alice's from us.
Normally, disputes like this were handled within the family and would be taken to the mustaches, older senior mafioso figures who would settle disputes.
After getting strung out on PCP one day, Andy told Gotti, "Fuck bringing this to the family, we'll settle this on our own." Gotti told us to come to a steel factory in Brooklyn. Me and Andy decided to do some PCP. We headed to the meeting. We decided to bring a few members of an old gang I used to run with called the Outcasts. Unfortunately for us, they were as crazy as us and were also as high as we were. We rolled up to the metal factory. There were men working and sparks flying everywhere. We were ushered through some doors at the back and then down into the basement. Gotti was waiting there with 6 of his guys. Gotti's got his guys, and we've got ours. They have guns, but so do we. Gotti says, "What do you got?" Andy responds, "What do you mean? What do I got?" "You owe Hampton for the restaurant, and Hampton is my friend."
The situation becomes very tense. There's no windows in the basement. It's a scary place to be. The door to the basement opens and 20 guys walk in. They are all there to back up Gotti.
Now we're fucked. A basement in a Brooklyn metal factory is a scary place to be. What were the chances? I'd survived a war. Now I was gonna die in a fucking basement in Brooklyn. It turned out that Gotti had his meat guys too. I reason in my head, if Andy and I back down and pay Gotti, we're finished on the streets. We have to say no to Gotti. But we don't know him very well. If we make him look weak in front of his guys, he could kill us. Andy doesn't even look at the meat guys. He steps towards Gotti and says, "Your friend Hampton, he's a piece of shit. He's a rat. He ain't getting a dime from us."
Now this was a tricky situation, real greaseball shit. The rule of the street was that you couldn't stick up for a rat no matter what. If the rat was proven to be a rat, then the rat would get whacked. If the accusation was false and there was no proof, then the accuser could get whacked.
"He's a rat?" Gotti says. "Ask around," Andy says.
Gotti's face doesn't register if he believes Andy or not, but by telling Gotti that Hampton is a rat, it gives Gotti an out. He can let us walk out without giving him a dime, but still save face.
I say, "Thanks for having us around so we could clear the air," and we walked out. When we got into the car, I asked Andy if Hampton was really a rat. I'll never forget what he said. "I don't know, but he sure looks like a rat, don't he?"
They all laughed. In the mob, you can get killed over nothing, whether it be having an affair with somebody's wife or just looking at someone the wrong way. You'd say a Hail Mary every time you woke up and every time you went to sleep, because it was another day that you made it on the streets.